One, two, three. Can you hear me? Okay, 1, 2, 3.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bill Moreno. I'm the Director for Policy and Legislation with the League of United Latin American Citizens. It's my honor and privilege to be with you here today for our program, A Brighter Tomorrow, remembering the victims of the Paso Massacre and addressing disinformation through social media. To begin our program, I'd like to invite Domingo Garcia, LULAC National President, to offer some opening remarks.
As many of you know, this has been one of the worst tragedies in terms of Mexican American and Latino history. I received a call just the day after the shootings to go to El Paso, and I went. And I remember being there, and it was almost surreal. I was taken to a hospital by Ray Mancera, who was one of our district council members there in El Paso. And I remember seeing all these parents, all these husbands and wives waiting in the rooms to find out what had happened to their loved ones, who had been gunned down on a regular day in El Paso, Texas, just going to Walmart to shop. I remember meeting a little girl whose parents were there raising money for a little league soccer tournament. And her father put himself in the way of the gunman to allow the little girls to escape. We're talking about 9 and 10-year-olds, little Latinas, and her mother also, and she got shot. And unfortunately, on that day, her name was Coco Garcia. She lived. Her husband died about 3 months later from that shooting. And luckily, all the little girls from that soccer team lived, but many people didn't. And so today, on behalf of LULAC and the work that we have done there, I'm going to ask for a moment of silence to honor all the victims of not only the massacre in El Paso, but also the victims throughout the history of racial and hatred and discrimination and violence that we've seen throughout the years. So at this time, I'd like to take a moment of silence on behalf of the victims. Thank you. At this time, I will let Mr. Moreno, I think you have a video you were going to play for us.
That's right, sir. So Jorge will cue that up for us.
It's going to be a while before El Paso feels normal again.
I remember hearing that, and I remember thinking about how angry I got, and I remember how much my heart hurt just thinking about the families and thinking about all the victims.
With no doubt, the August 3rd, 2019 shooting in El Paso left a big scar in this binational community, especially to the Mexican diaspora living in the US.
And obviously there was a lot of sadness and frustration and anger and pain within the community for something like that to happen here.
People are looking over their shoulders, and you walk into a department store or a grocery store and there are security guards checking you in and checking you out.
You know, I remember feeling so incredibly violated for our community that someone had enough hate in their heart to deliberately come here and hurt us because we are brown.
It wasn't somebody from our community that came and did that. It was somebody that came from hundreds of miles away to express that hatred. And not only did it come to our front doorstep, but it came specifically for us because of who we are. But I also feel it helped to kind of strengthen our community to a certain degree, and let people know that, you know, we're stronger than that, and we're better than that.
This was a very safe town and very low violent crime in the past, and there's just a different feeling here now today.
In the end, I think that's what should be remembered, in addition to the memories of those who were affected and their lives cut so short, is that we're stronger than that. We're better than that hatred as a community.
We are a loving community. We are a giving community. We are a community that will not be held down. And I'm so incredibly proud to be a member of this community. And I love you, El Paso.
We will never forget the victims of this despicable act. Thank you.
At this time, I'd also like to read out the names of all the victims, because I think it's important that we tell everybody the story and the names of the victims. Hate speech, fear-mongering, scapegoating, they have consequences. And those consequences can lead a young man to leave North Texas to go all the way to El Paso to kill Mexicans because he believes there's an invasion and people are stealing jobs. And that big lie, whether it's being used against Jews or Italians or Irish or now Mexican Americans and Latinos in 2020 and 2021, we need to make sure that we understand the consequences of that hate and the politicians who spew that hate, and we hold them accountable. So today I'd like to memorize those victims of this terrible tragedy. And I'll start now. And let's remember their names. Leonardo Campos, Jr., age 41. His wife, Maribel Campos, age 56. David Alva Johnson, age 63. Ivan Filiberto Monzano, age 41. Jordan Achondo, age 25. And her husband, Andre Pablo Ochondo, both passed. Arturo Benavides, age 59. Javier Amir Rodriguez, age 15. Adolfo Cierros Hernandez, and his wife, Sara Esther Regalo Moriel. Gloria Irma Marquez. María Eugenia Aragueta Roth. Elsa Mendoza de la Mora. Juan de Dios Velázquez Chaires. Guillermo Memo Garcia, that was the man that I saw in the hospital and ultimately didn't make it. Maria Flores, age 77. Raúl Flores, age 77. Margie Ricard, age 63. Alexander Hoffman, age 66. Teresa Sanchez, age 88. Angelina Silva Ingshby, age 86. Jorge Calvillo Garcia, 61. Luis Alfonso Juarez, age 90. As you can see, the range from 15 to 90 of the victims, who again were just the victims of hate and the rhetoric that we're seeing coming from Washington, Austin, and on hate radio and TV. And we need to celebrate their lives, uplift their memories, but we need to come together as a community to continue to fight, because peace can overcome hatred in terms of love overcoming hatred. And those of us who believe that the United States of America means that we are united against those who would seek to make and create tribalism and white nationalism, that we can overcome that. El Paso has proven that. And even though this was an act of hate, I was there in El Paso when we had a march the following week, and I saw El Paso come together like never before. I saw, moms holding their children. I saw families coming together and moving forward, and elected officials also saying what happened in El Paso must never happen again, by continuing our struggles to preserve our American country, our ethics, our morals, and what binds us together as a country, y pluribus unum, out of many one. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to our Congresswoman, or unless, Bill, you're going to do this, Veronica Escobar from El Paso, to make a few comments. Congresswoman Escobar.
Good afternoon. Are you able to hear me? I hope you are.
We are.
Perfect. Well, good afternoon, and Domingo, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you to LULAC for bringing us together. I want to express my gratitude to everyone on the Zoom, everyone here in the room with us, and to my beautiful community of El Paso. This is a day that, in some respects, I have been thinking about for a long time, with some sense of pain and dread because of everything that we are going to relive. But I think that, Domingo, you hit the nail on the head when you said, really today is about remembering those beautiful souls that were taken from us far too soon, and in one of the most unjust ways. And while I think it is so critical that we commemorate their lives and that we honor their memory, events such as this one are critical if we are going to go forward and learn from extremely painful moments. And I was just speaking with some reporters just a minute ago, and I was sharing with them that on August 3rd, 2019, our country truly had an opportunity to emerge from a very painful, horrific incident, to learn from why and how we got to becoming a community targeted by hate, and how we found ourselves, how El Paso found herself at the crossroads of our country's gun violence epidemic and our country's hate epidemic. And we had a real opportunity to turn a corner in the days and the weeks that followed. We had a real opportunity as a country to learn from the loss. We had a real opportunity as a country to unite and to acknowledge that we are better than this. It is tragic to know that not only have we not, as a country, learned from the tragedy of that day, but we have begun moving very sharply in the wrong direction. In my state, for example, in the state of Texas, we have seen not just a lack of interest in gun violence prevention legislation, but we've seen essentially a state legislature whose interest it is to flood the streets of Texas with guns. And it should be no surprise to us that that will create incredible harm in our state. We have also seen leaders with the loudest bully pulpits in our state using xenophobia and racism to fuel the same kind of hatred that was fueled leading up to August 3rd. And unfortunately, part of what allows the spread of that kind of hatred is social media and very powerful platforms that have yet to be adequately regulated or controlled, either by their corporate owners or, unfortunately, by Congress. I serve on the House Judiciary Committee, and I'm very proud that we are doing everything we can to begin to regulate some of these very powerful corporations through our antitrust regulations, but it's not happening quickly enough, and we don't have enough support yet to get laws that will protect communities from social media. And I'm hoping that we are able to gain momentum. And we're not just seeing the dangers involved in the fueling of hate, but we're seeing social media platforms fuel misinformation about COVID, fuel misinformation about our elections, and we're seeing a lot of that misinformation targeting Latino communities, Spanish-speaking communities. The consequences are significant. In a community like El Paso, where a quarter of our population is uninsured, where we're seeing the Delta variant and cases go up, in a community that can least afford the healthcare that is needed to deal with it, that kind of misinformation kills people. As we're seeing hatred continue to spread across social media platforms, that kind of hatred kills people. And the consequences are significantly far-reaching. The toll on our families, the toll on our community, it's not just emotional or mental health costs that we pay, but there is a financial toll that communities like ours pay. That we live in one of the most economically disadvantaged communities in the country. We were the target of an outsider's hatred and murder, and yet our taxpayers are going to have to shoulder the burden, not just of the prosecution of this killer, but the defense of this killer. And so as we have our dialogue and as we seek to do better and create a country where families like ours in El Paso can live free from fear, I hope that we can come up with concrete answers, and I hope that Congress develops the political will and courage needed to keep everybody safe, so that we don't have to continue to see families and communities like ours destroyed by hatred and misinformation. Thank you so much, Domingo. Once again, it's my privilege to be with you. Thank you for engaging all of us in this very important conversation.
Thank you, Congresswoman Escobar. I appreciate your comments and the hard work that you've done in Washington, as well as, when it happened, in terms of being on the ground and getting the message of El Paso and the families out to America and the world. Our next speaker is Joshua Geltzer. He's the Deputy Assistant to the President, Deputy Homeland Security Advisor, National Security Council, and is at the White House. Mr. Geltzer.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with all of you. It's an honor to be with the Congresswoman, with ADL, with LULAC, with Jonathan, with all of today's speakers, and really with this whole community, virtual, in person, wherever we find ourselves, as we discuss how to think about this a number of years after such a tragedy. And in some ways, the two words that are dominant in my mind as I get this opportunity to be with you all today are tragedy and urgency. We start with the tragedy. We start with those of us at the White House who convey our sympathies, our condolences for those who were lost on that tragic day in El Paso, those who still grieve those lost, those who suffered injuries, those who still deal with their injuries from that day. The best we can do here is to try to turn tragedy into a sense of urgency, and in particular, a sense of urgency to address the threat posed by domestic terrorism to Americans, and in particular to the communities whom domestic terrorists often deliberately try to target with their violent actions. We recently released this country's first ever national strategy for countering domestic terrorism. And I hope it conveys, I think it conveys, the sense of urgency that we are bringing to confront and tackle this challenge. In some ways, the emergence of that document reflected three things all set in motion during this administration's very first week in office. Again, it's that theme of urgency. First was a sense that domestic terrorism had reached the point where it posed enough threat to public safety, to national security, that it required a dedicated team right here at the White House to tackle. That's what I was honored to be asked to build. And that's what we did. We brought in experts from the Justice Department, from the FBI, from the National Counterterrorism Center, who could learn from the past years of rising violence, politically motivated, socially motivated, ideologically motivated violence, and develop policy solutions to stop those types of occurrences from happening again. The second thing also set in motion during that very first week of this administration was the development by our law enforcement and intelligence communities of a comprehensive assessment of today's threat. And especially as we talk about today, the role of disinformation and misinformation and how Americans come to understand or misunderstand the nature of this challenge. It was important to us to get the facts, to go to the experts in our government, to ask them to lay out the nature of this threat as we face it, so that we could build strategy and policy with a sense of urgency, but with a grounding in the facts. It's also why we released publicly an unclassified executive summary of that assessment, so that all Americans could read the same body of knowledge, body of facts, body of analysis that we were working from, and all start ideally from the same set of facts and the same expert analysis. And the third thing also set in motion, again, during that very first week of the administration, was the development of this national strategy. This meant bringing into rooms experts from law enforcement, from Homeland Security, but also from parts of our government that are seeing the manifestations of hate and hate-fueled violence in their own ways. Whether that's the Commerce Department as it deals with technology platforms, Education Department as it deals with hate-fueled violence on campuses, HHS, Health and Human Services, across the government. We wanted to know, how are these challenges affecting the constituencies you are charged with serving? And how can we work together to protect those communities? It didn't stop at the edges of our government either. It was critical to me, it was critical to us as we did this work to consult with those actually affected by violence. It's very easy when you're in government to get in rooms like this and meet with your colleagues, learn from them, but to be stuck in something of a bubble. We couldn't afford that on an issue that has touched too many real people's real lives. And so throughout the process of developing this strategy, we talked with outside organizations, civil rights and civil liberties organizations, advocacy organizations, community organizations, and of course, state and local partners, as well as critical partners in Congress on both sides of the aisle. Now, we felt the sense of urgency that I described earlier. And that's why before we released the strategy, we took a number of steps to improve our response to this challenge. But we felt it was important to tie all of that up comprehensively in the national strategy document that we released, to show that we were taking an aggressive, comprehensive, collaborative approach to addressing this threat. Let me just mention quickly the key pieces of that strategy, so you have a sense of how we're doing this work. The first pillar of that strategy involves understanding the threat better and sharing swiftly, fulsomely analyses of the threat across the federal family and the state, local, territorial, and tribal partners. And this goes right back to this theme of today. It's reflected in the title, it's reflected in the comments we've heard thus far. I suspect it'll be reflected in the comments that I'm eager to hear to come about the role of the internet and internet-enabled platforms in recruitment and radicalization to violence, especially by domestic terrorists. Understanding what we can about where the threat is going so that we can help, especially our state and local partners, be prepared for it and allocate sensibly their resources in a persistent threat environment is critical. The second pillar of the strategy involves preventing domestic terrorist violence, trying to stop individuals from reaching the point of criminality and violence, at which point they become a law enforcement challenge. And part of that involves building community-based programming, ensuring that those within a community who may be poised to see those trending towards violence know how to get the help that those individuals need. And it is partly about ensuring that we foster the type of digital literacy, online fitness that can make all of us more resilient to the type of challenges we now face as we live our lives increasingly online. And that includes domestic terrorism recruitment and mobilization to violence. We also want to do this work in a global setting, which is why this administration this spring announced that the United States had joined the Christchurch call to action to eliminate terrorist and violent extremist content online. This was something forged by our partners in New Zealand and in France after the terrible attack at 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand. And it leverages foreign governments who share our concerns about online recruitment to violence, so that as we talk in this multi-stakeholder forum about how to do better in making the internet a safer place, we share our concerns, we collaborate, and we generate new ideas while protecting freedom of expression along the way. The third piece of the strategy focuses more on law enforcement. It involves deterring domestic terrorism and doing justice when there have been acts of domestic terrorism that occur. This means that U.S. attorneys' offices, FBI field offices across the country are treating domestic terrorism as a truly top priority, and that they are getting the support consistently from Main Justice and the experts there to use the full range of laws available to address this challenge. It also means using screening and vetting to ensure that positions in the federal government that are sensitive cannot be exploited or abused by those drawn to these domestic terrorist ideologies for nefarious purposes. And finally, the fourth piece of the strategy involves confronting the long-term contributors to domestic terrorism. These are challenges that are broader than domestic terrorism, but they contribute to today's domestic terrorism threat as we face it. That means addressing the type of racism that fuels too much domestic terrorism, including, tragically, acts like those in El Paso. It involves dealing with the widespread availability of certain firearms, because that widespread availability can make domestic terrorism more feasible and more lethal when it does occur. And it involves addressing the polarization so often fueled by disinformation spread online that makes it easier for domestic terrorists to recruit and radicalize to violence. I know we need to pause there because there are other wonderful folks we need to hear from today. So let me just return to where I began. From this tragedy, from the too many tragedies that we've seen in domestic terrorism over the past few years, we have brought to this work over our first 6 months a sense of urgency, a sense that real people and real lives have been tragically affected by this challenge and that we can do better in stopping its recurrence in the future. I am grateful for the chance to be with this strong and extraordinary community today, and I thank you for the chance to be part of this.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments and your analysis. I think that was important for people to find out what creates these homegrown terrorists and what radicalizes them to do things like what they did on either on January 6th or unfortunately on this date in August in El Paso. Our next speaker is a longtime ally and friend. He's the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt. Jonathan. Jonathan, we can't hear you. You're on mute. Ramon? Bill? Okay, Jonathan, go again. I think I can hear you now.
Not yet.
No, not yet. We cannot hear you.
How about now?
Good.
Okay, apologies. There's always some technical screw up on every Zoom, I suppose. First of all, thank you so much, Domingo, for the introduction, and to all my esteemed colleagues who are joining us today. And I wish today were a different occasion. I wish there were a different moment that convened us together as allies, as colleagues, as friends, as people committed to fighting for justice for everyone. But today we're here to remember the victims of the horrific massacre in El Paso with a firm and unyielding commitment to fight hate on the ground and online. In the last several years, we've witnessed the growing normalization of hate spreading through our nation and really across the globe. And the interdependency of the online and offline hate is simply indisputable. Unchecked hate on social and on other platforms, and the misinformation that spreads from it, we've seen has deadly consequences. Several white supremacist murderers have posted online their anti-immigrant hate before committing horrible massacres, including the Christchurch mosque in New Zealand that spawned the the declaration that Josh was just speaking of, the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, and of course, the horrifying act in El Paso. Most salient is the white supremacist conspiracy theory known as the Great Replacement, which transitioned from the fringes to the mainstream and is now espoused by millions of viewers on major news networks like Fox News or social media platforms like Facebook. This toxic idea states that unless immediate action is taken, the so-called white race is doomed to extinction by an alleged rising tide of color, purportedly controlled and manipulated by Jews. It's the Great Replacement theory that underpinned the El Paso shooter's manifesto when he wrote that this attack was a response to the, quote, Hispanic invasion of Texas. And he said that he was defending America from, quote, cultural and ethnic replacement brought on by an invasion. This kind of language is untenable in any context. And again, it can have homicidal consequences. Unfortunately, white supremacist vitriol toward Latinos and immigrants generally has not abated since El Paso, underscoring the critical importance of ongoing vigilance and community awareness about these threats. Evidence of the anti-immigrant messaging and white supremacist propaganda, which our Center on Extremism tracks on a day-to-day basis, is manifold. We see messages like, quote, one nation against invasion, or mass immigration is white genocide, or deport illegal aliens, or things like build the wall, deport them all. This is the kind of language that, again, has moved from the margins into the mainstream. And it's been co-opted as political weaponry by prominent candidates and elected officials. Some white supremacists have used propaganda to target the Latino directly, the Latino community even more directly, using messaging like the Mexicans must go and stop race mixing. Look, the reality is that 2 years after the El Paso attack, the threat of domestic extremism remains material. After the attack on the Capitol on January the 6th, the intelligence community recognized that white supremacist terrorism is the top domestic threat to the homeland. We commend the Biden administration's recognition of this threat and its introduction, as Josh kind of alluded to, of the first ever comprehensive interagency strategy focused specifically on protecting Americans and countering the threat of domestic violent extremism. This strategy, which I would say in many ways parallels ADL's own Protect plan, prioritizes not just the role of government, but a whole of society solution to addressing extremism. And even as we do that, the protection of civil liberties and how the government tackles the threat. More must be done, but the strategy is a start. I would say that another huge factor in the rise and influence of domestic extremism is, I've already mentioned, online hate and disinformation. Last July, the Stop Hate for Profit Coalition, which I'm proud included LULAC and Hispanic Media Center and other organizations like the NAACP, Color of Change, Sleeping Giants, Common Sense Media, many groups launched a campaign to push social media companies, and specifically Facebook, the largest social media service in the world, to put people over profit. And indeed, our campaign prompted Facebook to make a series of concessions, the first time that had happened in its 15 plus years. Earlier this year, ADL released the Repair Plan, a strategy for social media platforms and policymakers to take meaningful action to push hate and extremism back in the box, into the fringes of the digital world. Because we know that there's even less oversight when it comes to online hate and disinformation in Spanish, which is why we joined the Ya Basta Facebook campaign to address this very issue. Because if you think it's bad in the English language, in Spanish, the social media services are absolutely delinquent at policing this hate, which is designed to terrorize people as much as it is to recruit new fellow travelers to their cause. At ADL, we're constantly looking for innovative ways to combat hate. And just last week, we announced an important new partnership with PayPal, the largest online peer-to-peer payment platform payment platform in the world that will allow us together to fight extremism and hate through the financial industry and to support at-risk communities. Through this collaboration, PayPal and ADL have launched a research effort to address the urgent need to understand how extremist and hate movements throughout the US are attempting to leverage peer-to-peer platforms and the financial system to fund criminal activity. The reason we're joining this coalition and engaging in these efforts is because we recognize the severe threat of domestic extremism, online violence, and misinformation. We are committed to working together to do the necessary work to keep our communities safe. And as we commemorate the victims, the martyrs of this horrible attack in El Paso, we're ready to collaborate with LULAC and with the National Hispanic Media Center and other organizations to prosecute this fight together. Working together is the only way we win. Thank you, Domingo.
All right. Next, we have the CEO of the Hispanic Media, Brenda Castillo. If you can say a couple of comments for us, please.
Hello, everyone. Brenda Castillo here. Latinos are being targeted, attacked, and killed. One of the weapons used is disinformation. Disinformation about COVID, disinformation about voting, disinformation about the border, which is creating hate and leading to death for the Latino communities. As a former El Paso resident who still has family here, it angers me to the core what happened here 2 years ago. As the leader of the National Hispanic Media Coalition dedicated to eliminating hate, discrimination, and racism towards Latinos, I have to tell you that I was not surprised of another terrorist attack done by a white extremist. Hate and violence against Tejanos and Latinos has occurred for centuries, dating back to 1910 with La Matanza, where Mexicans and Americans of Mexican descent were targeted, attacked, and lynched by Anglo-Texans, including this state's very own Texas Rangers. These are historic events that you won't read about in our history books. These are events that our children should be taught about in school. And now at the 2-year anniversary of the El Paso Massacre, the largest massacre against Latinos in modern history, we are here honoring the 23 innocent lives taken all in the name of stopping the Hispanic invasion. The FBI did not categorize this massacre as a racially motivated hate crime, but I do. Innocent lives were taken for no other reason than the fact that they were Latinos. It didn't matter that this land, Texas, belonged to our native ancestors before it was stolen. It didn't matter that the El Paso community is built on Mexican, indigenous, and immigrant lives. Just like it didn't matter to Donald Trump, and just like it didn't matter to Facebook, who took Trump's money to run more than 2,000 ads that spread false information about the invasion at the southern border. Those ads were directed at spreading hate and disinformation about Mexicans, immigrants, and all other brown natives Trump deemed criminals and rapists. We are here to tell Facebook and all social media companies, ya basta, enough is enough. How many more must die before we hold social media companies accountable for the violence and harassment that results from their inaction? Our Spanish language disinformation coalition, made up of more than 25 plus Latino and advocacy organization, is demanding that all social media companies act on our 4 demands. 1, hire and publicly identify a C-suite position to oversee U.S. Spanish language content moderation, policy, and enforcement. 2, publicly explain the translation process of the content moderation algorithms, including how the algorithms are trained and audited to ensure proactive detection, reporting, and processing of Spanish language content. 3, clarify whether content moderators evaluate content in language, translated, or both, explain precisely how many US-based Spanish language content moderators the company employs, as well as the overall number of US-based content moderators, whether or not they're direct employees or contractors. And number 4, publicly share the materials that are used to train content moderators of US-based Spanish language content. In order to prevent future massacres, the National Hispanic Media Coalition knows that we must stop online hate and disinformation that fuels domestic terrorism and extremism. NHMC also feels that platform self-regulation does not work and that there must be a federal agency that enforces platform accountability. We all know that children are not born with hate. To prevent hate, truth must be told in our households and taught in our schools. All the truth, the good and the bad. Thank you for listening.
All right, thank you. And again, that was Brenda Castillo, and she is the not only the CEO, but also the president of the National Hispanic Media Coalition. Next is, with some final remarks, is the first woman president in the history of LULAC. She is a legend in LULAC circles and well known there in El Paso. She's our former national president, Emeritus, Belen Robles. Belen, welcome.
And Darío, we can't hear President Robles, FYI team.
Mis estimados hermanos, hermanas, amigos, amigas, my dear friends, I am thankful to be with you on this occasion of reflection and resolve. As we have heard here, El Paso has turned painful tragedy into a triumph of truth. It is this, our spirit of solidarity and love is overcoming blind hatred. Our honor for every soul taken is eternal and deep beyond words. And our belief in goodness over evil is unbreakable and more powerful. Yes, America has come a long way in the many years that LULAC has been at work. We have made a great deal of progress for everyone, men, women, trans, and LGBTQ. Just think of the strides we have made for Latinos in so many ways. In jobs, in housing, voting rights, and yes, especially in education. Today, our youth has opportunities many of us could never have imagined. Yet, they are also facing an ever more confusing flood of misinformation. Daily, they are bombarded with messages meant to divide our nation. That divisive and toxic hate speech that filled the minds of a killer 2 years ago. Yes, our job is still very important today, as it was in 1954 when I first became active in public service and LULAC. Indeed, across the United States and Puerto Rico and everywhere else, people still need our help. The tragedy of El Paso will not and must not fade nor be forgotten. Neither must we ignore the factors that lead to violence. LULAC can and will continue to confront racism, discrimination, and injustice. We will stand for opportunity advancement, and equality. We will speak out for those who cannot and others whose voices are now silent. Above all, we will never stop our push for the full freedom from fear and oppression. On a personal note, as many of you know, El Paso is my home. This is where I was born, and this is where I have lived all my life. So this is very personal. The brutal act of August the 3rd, 2019 hit me, my family, friends, and everyone in this community to our very core. So today I want to say from our hearts, thank you for coming back. Thank you for your prayers and acts of kindness, calls, donations, and support. Remember, we continue to walk together on this road to righteousness in our country. May we one day reach that destination. And may future generations rejoice for those whose precious sacrifice earned that price. Muchas gracias. Thank you, my dear friends, and may God bless you.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate your comments there from El Paso. I will end with some comments from our CEO, Cindy Benavides, CEO of LULAC. Cindy?
Muchísimas gracias, President Garcia. And to Representative Veronica Escobar, thank you so much for your leadership. To my colleagues, Jonathan, Brenda, thank you for all that you do every single day. I know that we are texting, we are calling, we are always locking arms to make sure that we continue to advance, to protect, and to defend our Latino community, as well as all of our communities who come under attack. President Robles, thank you so much for always being so eloquent, for leading by example, and for standing so strongly for our community in El Paso. To our LULAC national team, Bill, Sandra, Lupe, thank you for all that you're doing in our second headquarters, our second home, which is El Paso, and what you do every single day to advance our community within El Paso and within the entire state of Texas. I will just end it with this. No podemos tapar el sol con un dedo. We can't cover the sun with a finger. We must continue to acknowledge what has happened in El Paso, how Latinos were directly attacked because of disinformation, how we can make sure to continue to unite to advance our agenda. And a special thank you to the White House. I know, Josh, you're representing the White House, and I know that President Garcia will be meeting with President Biden tomorrow. But we are so excited to make sure that we continue to uplift the plight of Latinos, the plight of our LGBTQ community, our Jewish community, who's experiencing so much anti-Semitism in this moment, our Muslim American community, our transgender community, our immigrant community, and know that we will, like we have for 92 years, protect and defend. And if you see our logo, it's a shield, and it's a shield because for 92 years, LULAC has stood up against oppression, against racism, against discrimination. And so to all of our allies, to all of our El Paso community, we love you, we stand with you, we stand united, and know that we will never forget. LULAC doesn't forget, no se nos olvida, and we will stand strong with you. Los queremos muchos. Con eso, President Garcia, I turn it over to you.
I want to thank everybody who's participated in this program. It's important that we memorize and remember and uplift those lives that were lost in that day. And it's also important that we as civil rights organizations and Americans and Texans look forward to continuing to defeat those forces that will divide us, those forces that are scapegoating, fear-mongering, engaging in the most basic gutter politics that we've seen in quite a while. I mean, I'm from Texas, so I'm used to knowing about the KKK and, the White Citizens Council and things like that. But it went from being political to being very personal, with guns and violence now being inflicted for the first time in recent memory. Not that it hasn't happened, it has happened throughout the history of the Southwest. But it's important that we continue that struggle to defeat hatred, to defeat that white nationalism, and that those, unfortunately, those people in both the media, the social media, and in politics that continue to espouse that type of tribalism and division. And we are going to continue to fight that like we have since 1929. And hopefully one day it will be defeated and we will have truly one nation with liberty and justice for all. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much.